Okay, let's dive right in. For decades, the Hare Krishna movement, ISKCON, has been wrestling with one of its biggest, most polarizing debates. It's a question that really strikes at the very heart of their tradition, their future, and who they are in the modern world.
And that one big question is this: can a woman formally initiate disciples, that is, act as a Diksha guru within this spiritual tradition? Now, women have always been celebrated as instructing gurus or shiksha gurus, but that formal role of initiation, that has opened up a huge philosophical divide.
You see, the whole conflict really boils down to two competing ideas about the movement's mission. On one side, you have this argument for missionary agility. The idea here is that to succeed in the West, the movement has to be flexible, to adapt things like gender roles to fit the time and place. But on the other side, you have the call to uphold traditional roles, which are seen as being laid out in Scripture and absolutely essential for stability. Now, the case for adaptation is built on a few really key points. Proponents will tell you, look, philosophically, the soul doesn't have a gender, so why should a person's physical body stop them if they're spiritually qualified? And there's a practical side to it, too. There's a real worry that if they don't change, the movement will start to look out of touch, like a Hindu cult. And finally, some say this isn't even a new thing, but that they'd just be bringing back a tradition of female gurus that's existed in other similar spiritual families.
So you've got these really passionate arguments on both sides. But here's the thing that's so interesting. After years and years of debates and papers and votes, they're still stuck. It feels like they're just going around in circles. So why can't they find any common ground?
Well, the source material we're looking at today offers a pretty radical idea. It suggests that this deadlock isn't really about gender or social justice or even tradition versus modernity. The argument is that the root of the problem is all about how each side tries to prove its point. It's about evidence. And that brings us to this really key concept from Vedic philosophy called pramāna shāsatra. The easiest way to think about it is as the science of evidence. It's a system for figuring out what counts as valid proof, and, this is the important part, it organizes all proof into a strict hierarchy. So, according to this way of thinking, not all evidence is created equal. Not at all. To get to the truth, especially when you're talking about spiritual topics, you have to know which source of knowledge trumps the others.
The hierarchy has 3 levels. Think of it like a ladder. At the very bottom, you've got pratyaksha. That's what we see and hear with our own senses. One step up from that is anumana, which is our logic, our ability to reason things out. But way up at the top, considered the absolute authority, is shabda, the revealed word of Scripture.
There's a great analogy for this. Imagine a court case. Your direct perception, pratyaksha, is like the eyewitness testimony. It can be helpful, but we all know eyewitnesses can be wrong. Your logic, anumana, is like the clever lawyer's argument. It might sound really convincing. But shabda, the Scripture, that's the law book itself. And it doesn't matter how good the lawyer's argument is, it can't just overturn what's written in the law. Now, I know what you might be thinking, because this can feel a little strange to our modern minds. Why are our own logic and what we see with our own eyes considered less reliable than some ancient texts? Well, the source points to this classical idea of the 4 defects of human nature. The philosophy here is that every single one of us, no matter how smart we are, has these 4 built-in problems. We tend to make mistakes, we tend to be an illusion, we tend to cheat or rationalize to get what we want, and our senses are just plain imperfect. And because of these defects, our logic and perception are seen as fundamentally flawed, so they can't be the final word on spiritual truth.
Okay, so how does all this theory actually connect to the debate? Let's use this framework to take apart the core arguments for female Diksha gurus, or FDG. This is where the rubber really meets the road.
The source material basically lays out the pro-FDG argument as a simple syllogism. The reason is an observation: hey, women are already amazing preachers and spiritual leaders. The goal is, of course, to maximize that success for the movement. And the rule that connects them is a logical leap. Therefore, if these women become gurus, even more people will be inspired. And here's the crucial point that this analysis makes. This entire argument, from start to finish, falls right into the category of anumana. It's logical inference. It's a strategy based on looking at a situation and trying to get to a desired result.
So this sets up the ultimate test within the pramāna framework. You have an argument for FDG that's based on logic, anumana, and you have traditional roles that are laid out in Scripture, shabda. The big question is, according to that hierarchy of knowledge, can a logical argument, no matter how good it sounds, ever override the direct word of Scripture?
To try and answer that, the source doesn't just stick with theory. It actually does a quantitative breakdown of the evidence from the movement's founder, Srila Prabhupada.
And wow, this table really lays bare the core of the argument. Just look at the numbers. On one side, you have over 1,000 documented instances where the founder taught and supported traditional gender roles. On the other, you have maybe 3 to 5 instances that could be interpreted to support female gurus, and they often come with conditions. The source argues that one is a consistent core teaching, while the other is made up of just a few occasional conditional statements.
And all of this analysis leads to the document's final and pretty challenging conclusion about what the movement is actually built on. Here's how the source ties it all together, using that pramāna framework we talked about. Our perception, pratyaksha, tells us that Western culture really values gender equality. Our logic, anumana, suggests that if we adapt to that value, the movement will probably grow. But the scripture, shabda, consistently describes a very specific social structure with clearly defined roles.
So the final argument presented is this. If you allow what it calls the 1% exception, that handful of ambiguous statements, to cancel out the 99% foundation of consistent scriptural teaching, then you're making a choice. You are choosing to place modern logic and perception above the authority of Scripture. You're flipping that traditional hierarchy of knowledge completely upside down.
And in the end, the source material leaves us with this incredibly powerful question. It reframes the whole thing. This isn't just a policy decision about gender. It's a fundamental choice about the movement's source of authority. Is it built on what they call the solid rock of Scripture, or on the shifting sands of modern logic and cultural trends? According to this analysis, that's the real question that has to be answered.